Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today we're going to be talking about 20 movies currently included with HBO Max that you've probably never even heard of. So this is going to be a list of 20 movies where I spend about a minute per movie telling you why you should watch it. These are all movies that are lesser known and they're currently included with your HBO Max subscription. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, and later on in the video I'll tell you how I created DarrenVanDam.com using their tools, but we're going to start this list off all the way at the back at number 20 with a little known movie that stars Jason Bateman, Mila Kunis, and it's actually directed by Mike Judge. If the name Mike Judge does not ring a bell, he's most famous for having created Beavis and Butthead, King of the Hill, Office Space, and Idiocracy. So he's a comedy legend, and while Extract is probably his least known movie, it still does have that Mike Judge sensibility. Now, I would put this movie nowhere near masterpieces like Office Space, which is why it's all the way back at number 20, but if you generally like his brand of humor, then Extract does have a lot of laughs in it. It's just not a real knee slapper of a comedy from him. Now, my number 19 pick came out back when Twilight was a big thing, when it was kind of in the middle of its run in theaters. This is a movie that tried to capitalize on that, based on a book, teenagers and love, supernatural stuff, the whole thing. Now, considering all of that, I Am Number 4 is actually a pretty fun movie. So even though this does kind of fall into that Twilight category, it's much less sappy and has a lot more action than most of those movies typically have. And it's kind of fun action. You get some big monsters and things. Teresa Palmer's actually in this too. She's in a ton of movies I recommend for some reason. And again, I would not call this a good movie, but it's certainly overlooked. And if you're the least bit interested in that genre, then this is one that I think has been underrated for a little too long. Now, I promise I do have a lot of really good movies on this list, but I also have a couple of famously bad ones. Now, Eating Raoul is one of the most famous bad movies ever made because it is so entertaining to watch. So this is not just a low budget movie. There's a ton of low budget movies and a bunch of them on this list, but Eating Raoul is clearly made by people who have no idea not just how to make movies, but even how storytelling works. And not only that, the movie kind of features this swinger culture thing with cannibalism mixed in, and it's really bonkers. I mean, Eating Raoul does go for a lot of laughs, and a lot of them actually land pretty well, but you're also gonna be laughing at how absurd and silly the movie is, how terrible the acting is. If you generally like famously bad movies, Eating Raoul is easily in the top 10 of all time. Easily. Okay, we're only on number 17 of this list, and I've already got an all-out action movie that stars Zoe Saldana, Chris Evans, and Idris Elba in The Losers. And what's interesting about The Losers is, as famous as all those people are now, they were actually playing second fiddle to Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Yeah, that Jeffrey Dean Morgan in this movie. He's actually the lead. So this is a smaller movie, but it's absolutely packed with really fun action. The only drawback is it is PG-13, so a lot of the action is neutered. And Jason Patric actually plays a pretty decent bad guy. I feel like this is maybe the last decent thing I ever saw him in, but still, fun action. Do not expect anything remotely serious with this movie. So if you generally like kind of wild action movies like that, The Losers is not like solid gold. In fact, I don't even consider it to be highly rewatchable, but if you've never seen it, it is gonna make for a great Friday or Saturday night watch. All right, we're gonna round out my bottom 5 with an Eddie Murphy movie that I think is one of the funniest movies he did, and it was one of the most overlooked movies he ever did, NORBIT.
What's that?
Mary, Mother of God!
Now, this was on the tail end of him doing the clumps, and I think people, for good reason, were tired of seeing him play all these characters in the fat suits, all of that. It was a little bit tired when this movie came out. Again, totally understandable, but NORBIT is a very different movie from anything Eddie Murphy's done. It does have the same comedic sensibility, but This movie is ultimately about a man who is being abused by his wife, which is a story we don't see on film that often. Now, obviously, it's the other way around more often than not, but the depiction of it in this movie is actually quite good and a little serious for a comedy movie. There's a lot of silly laughs in it, but then it's got a good story and an interesting story for this type of movie, so it is fairly overlooked. If you've ever liked any of the sillier movies Eddie Murphy is known for and you sort of passed on this one, like I know I did originally, I'm telling you, Norbit is much better than you probably thought it was. Okay, that was my bottom 5, and admittedly it's a weird mix, but my top 15 on this list are all really solid movies, and I know a lot of them you probably never even heard of, but before that, I do want to tell you about DarrenVanDam.com and today's sponsor, Squarespace. Now, I research everything before I buy it. I even researched the light bulbs in this room pretty extensively before I bought them, but I did the same thing when I was going to create a website. I compared Squarespace to all of the other competitors out there, and I chose Squarespace about a year before they decided to become a sponsor, because that's about how long it takes to make a website, or at least that's how long I took with it, but not because it was difficult. Squarespace made this incredibly easy for me to put together. Just take a look at this site. Look how good this thing looks. I did all of this without a stitch of code, and Squarespace let me push and pull and tweak and make all sorts of design changes, yet they also kept me on the rails. They kept me from doing weird things that are not going to make sense to the end user, and it was all very intuitive and fun to make. I had a blast making this website. So when this video is over, go check out DarrenVanDam.com and be sure to sign up for my newsletter. I'm about to release my first issue. It's going to be filled with movie recommendations and some fun stuff, but Squarespace lets me manage all of that too. It's all under one roof, and it's just incredibly easy and convenient, yet it's really robust. There's a lot of tools there. I highly recommend going to squarespace.com and signing up for a free trial. It's absolutely free, but when you are ready to register a domain name or launch a website, go to my link. That's squarespace.com/flickconnection, and you're gonna save 15% off your first order with Squarespace. Again, I did a ton of research before choosing Squarespace for my site, and they are the perfect fit for me. Hopefully they are for you too, but let's move on with the rest of this list and try to find some perfect movies for you. Turner Classic Movies is included as part of HBO Max along with a bunch of other stuff, but that means they've got some really good classic movies. Now, most of the classics are things you've heard of before, but one that is much lesser known that I highly recommend is The Wages of Fear. Now, no matter how many languages you speak, you're probably gonna have to read some subtitles for this movie. It's spoken in a bunch of different languages. It's originally from France and is an amazing wartime movie. In this movie, some men are tasked with delivering a bunch of nitroglycerin down a bumpy road. Now, the reasons they have to do so are pretty dire, and they need to do so fairly quickly, yet if this nitroglycerin is bumped in any kind of way, it's going to explode, kill all of them, and possibly cost the lives of a bunch of other people if they're not able to deliver this nitroglycerin. So those are the stakes. This is a brilliant movie. It's beautifully shot. I mean, The Wages of Fear is a masterclass in tension. If you consider yourself a movie buff and you've never seen this movie, it's one of the best hidden gems from this era. Definitely check it out. Now, I'm sure there are a ton of you watching who are fans of Jackie Chan, but I bet a lot of you have never seen a lot of his most famous movies, the ones from China that he was famous for long before Rush Hour. While there are quite a few gems to pick from his older filmography, Police Story is currently included with HBO Max, and it's certainly one of the better ones and has some of the better stunts. Now, I will say Police Story is not shot as well as some of his later movies like Rumble in the Bronx, things like that, where they captured the stunts a little bit better. However, you need to remind yourself that Jackie Chan is actually doing everything you see on camera. There's no CG effects or anything of that kind in this movie. I mean, yes, those are real light bulbs, and yes, he really did hurt himself doing that, and a bunch of other things in the movie. So I consider Police Story to be required viewing for Jackie Chan fans, but even if you were just sort of a lighter fan of some of his more American-made movies later in his career, it's still really interesting to go back and watch what he's really famous for, which is just this heavy stunt work in these older Chinese flicks. All right, we're going to switch things up quite a bit with The Exorcism of Emily Rose. To me, this is one of the better but lesser known exorcism movies. There is a ton of them. The Exorcist was such a hit movie that it has become its own subgenre, and it's filled with a lot of pretty crappy movies. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is easily one of the better ones. Not only does this one involve an exorcism, but there's also a murder investigation that's kind of at the core of the story, deals with some flashbacks and things, and really does a good job of separating itself from The Exorcist. I think a lot of the subgenre exorcism movies really try to do what The Exorcist does and fail. And Emily Rose is just a very different type of story. It's structured differently. The writer-director of this would actually go on to do the Doctor Strange movie. He also directed Sinister, which I thought was a decent horror movie, but The Exorcism of Emily Rose might be one of his best movies, and it does have somewhat of a cult following, but I'm sure there are a lot of you watching that never really bothered because so many of these movies are so bad. So when I was in high school and college, the movie Swingers was one of my favorite movies. No, the movie's not about swingers, but it's a classic comedy starring Vince Vaughn. It's one of the earliest movies he ever did, and it's comedy gold. It is a cult classic for a reason. If you were a fan of that movie, I highly recommend checking out Made.
I want you to take it back to the business class. I want you to round up a couple honeys. At our hotel room, we're gonna have kind of a pool party. Like a California gangster style, you know what I mean?
This also stars Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau. Favreau actually directed this, and it's one of the earlier movies that he directed, but he has gone on to have a stellar career, having directed movies like Iron Man, Chef, the live-action Jungle Book, and he's responsible for really helming The Mandalorian. So the guy has an incredible pedigree in terms of directing, and this is a small movie he did for about $1 million, where he and Vince Vaughn play these two guys basically just starting to squeak their way into the mob, and they get sent on a mission and Vince Vaughn can't shut up. It's one of those types of things.
Oh yeah, because you know they're probably gonna page us and ask us to whack out the pilot up front. You know what I mean? Okay. Unless we have something to do in the next 5 hours, we could probably sit here and have some drinks and relax like gentlemen and enjoy ourselves and actually have fun with the trip.
So if you were ever a fan of Swingers, I would put Made even higher on this list for you, but because I know this type of comedy is not really for everybody, and Vince Vaughn's character in this movie is gonna get underneath some people's skin, I had to put it further back on the list. Okay, so in 1992, there was a movie that came out that starred Emilio Estevez, Rene Russo, Anthony Hopkins, and Mick Jagger, and it also features time travel. In fact, let me just read you the synopsis from IMDb because it's way more interesting than anything I could say. Bounty hunters from the future transport a doomed race car driver to New York City in 2009, where his mind will be replaced with that of a dead billionaire. So if that doesn't sell you on the movie, then I can tell you that FREEJACK is probably not for you, but this is actually a cooler movie than it sounds like. You read the synopsis and it sounds really dopey and stupid, and that's in there. You get kind of this dated thing from 1992 that is a little silly and doesn't quite make sense, and you also get Mick Jagger in a time travel movie, so there's some cool elements here as well. It's got a bizarre mix. In fact, it being mediocre is probably why time has forgotten this movie. If it was terrible, people would probably still love it, and if it was good, people would love it. It's in this limbo space, but still, if that synopsis piqued your interest, you should definitely check this one out. Now, I recommend Jim Jarmusch movies on this channel pretty often. More recently, I've talked about Only Lovers Left Alive and Ghost Dog, but today we're talking about Dead Man starring Johnny Depp, which is one of my personal favorites. Now, I will say this is a slow-paced movie. It's all in black and white, and it's mostly just conversations with people. Now, there is a story. Johnny Depp plays a character who takes a bullet early on in the story and is essentially a dead man walking for the rest. So that is the theme, but these really wild characters come in and out of the movie. They're only really present for about one scene, but you get amazing performances from people like Iggy Pop, Crispin Glover, John Hurt, Gabriel Byrne. Billy Bob Thornton shows up for a little bit, and a bunch of other faces you're gonna recognize. I will say the score is done by Neil Young. If you're gonna let your position on the political spectrum prevent you from watching a movie like this, have at it, but it is a pretty sick soundtrack. It's all just guitar and nothing else. This is an art film, it's not for everybody, but if you generally like movies like that, then Dead Man is a total gem. And then we'll have another big swing in tone with a little-known movie starring Nicole Kidman called Birth. Now, this is actually from one of my favorite directors who's only done a few movies, Jonathan Glazer. He has only directed this movie, Sexy Beast, which is another one I highly recommend, and Under the Skin with Scarlett Johansson. So he's done some really wild movies. I will say Birth is my least favorite of his, yet I still have it ranked fairly high on this list. In this movie, a very young boy claims to be the reincarnated husband of Nicole Kidman's character, and it goes to a fairly grim place. Now, this is not a horror movie, it's not super dark, yet the way that it's directed and treated has this real eerie sense about it. It's kind of creepy. I would consider this to be nowhere near as dark as the other two films of his that I mentioned, yet it still kind of has this bizarre sensibility about it. It is fairly slow-paced, the concept is fairly simple, but considering all of that, it's really well directed and you get a really incredible performance from Nicole Kidman, as always. So if you've liked Jonathan Glazer's other movies, I highly recommend checking out Birth. However, if you're not familiar with his other movies, I would recommend starting with something like Sexy Beast first and then working your way up to Birth, because it is one of the more strange projects he's done, even compared to Under the Skin. All right, I already mentioned Neil Young, might as well mention Alec Baldwin as well. Two names in the news for the last 6 months or so, but Alec Baldwin in The Cooler is one of the cooler roles I've seen him in the last 20 years or so, but this movie's really focused on William H. Macy's character. Now, this is old school Las Vegas, or more specifically, the transition from old Las Vegas to this new corporate version of Las Vegas. And in this movie, William H. Macy plays what is called a cooler, which was a real thing. He's considered to be a highly unlucky person, and he's paid to go around and sit and play at tables and casinos that are hot so that he can cool them down. So you're starting off this story with kind of a miserable character in William H. Macy. Maria Bello plays a cocktail waitress, and they start this interesting relationship, and then Alec Baldwin plays this really tough casino manager, kind of a holdover from like a Martin Scorsese era type of Las Vegas. And the movie itself, the story is kind of wedged in between. It's really well directed, incredibly well acted, and it's got a fantastic story. For such a lesser known movie, easily one of the better things you can check out on HBO Max right now. All right, now we'll mix things up with some levity and some heart in a movie where Ryan Gosling is dating a life-size sex doll.
You know, Bianca's a missionary.
Lars and the Real Girl is an incredibly touching movie about a man who has some mental issues, who begins dating this life-size sex doll and begins to bring her around to friends and family as if she's real. Now, the movie itself is not nearly as creepy as the synopsis sounds. Ryan Gosling is playing this really sort of damaged person, and it's a very touching movie. It's very funny at times, it's very awkward at times, but it's not raunchy or dirty or anything like that. This is a very good, grounded movie. And he's playing a character very different from anything you normally see him in. He's normally a hunk. He's normally kicking people's ass. He's doing none of that here, yet he's playing this really incredible character and bringing a lot of life to him. Whether you're interested in the synopsis of this or not, I'm telling you, this is a solid movie, again, with a lot of heart. And while it has gathered a following over the years, I think it deserves a lot more eyeballs before it leaves HBO Max. And my next pick, for some reason, has not become a cult classic, even though I think it definitely deserves to be. It's from director James Mangold, who did Ford vs. Ferrari, Logan, Walk the Line, and it stars Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, Harvey Keitel, and Sylvester Stallone in Copland. Now, in this movie, Stallone plays a sheriff of a New Jersey suburb that is populated with New York City cops. So he's having to play sheriff in a town full of police, and there's a lot of seedy stuff going on in this movie. A lot of fantastic characters, including, I think, maybe the best role ever from Michael Rappaport. While it's not quite a mob movie, it is adjacent to one. It's very close to one and kind of takes place within the same world. If you've ever been a fan of gangster movies, crime movies, Copland is top shelf stuff that was very well reviewed when it came out. It just has not been remembered with time, I think, the way that it deserves to be. All right, my next pick is easily one of the more well-known cult movies on this list. It's from 1986. It stars Rutger Hauer hunting people down on the highways in The Hitcher.
Heading west on the long, lonely highway, only his dreams for company,
Until...
My mother told me never to do this.
Now this too sort of spawned a subgenre. This is about a maniac hunting down people on the highway, like a desert highway. Now we've seen that in other movies. In fact, there's a remake of The Hitcher that's not nearly as good as this, but The Hitcher is probably still one of the best in this genre because it's so well directed. Not just the way it's shot and the acting. By the way, Jennifer Jason Leigh plays a really great role in this movie. Even though Rutger Hauer obviously steals the show from beginning to end, this is really his movie, and he absolutely kills it. But the pacing of it, the story, everything works really well. It just keeps moving, and the tension is just absolutely fantastic. It's got a good nostalgic feel to it with that classic 80s soundtrack and everything. If you're vibing that, you want sort of a classic 80s feel that's creepy and got some action in it, then The Hitcher is definitely gonna be for you. Okay, so easily the longest movie on this list, one of the longest movies on HBO Max right now, is also one of the best science fiction movies ever made. It comes from Russia, so you will have to read subtitles, which means it's also lesser known, and a lot of you watching have probably never seen Stalker. Now, I think that this movie is a masterpiece. It is brilliantly done, yet it is very subtle and very, with a capital V, very slow paced. So this is gonna be for the art film crowd, the movie buff crowd. If you've never seen Stalker, there's a slim percentage of you, but some of you are gonna have your minds blown by this movie. Most of you will have to look up what it's about when it's over because it's not gonna make a ton of sense. This was originally gonna be 2 movies. In fact, the title changes halfway through so you can see how it was originally intended to be viewed. You could watch this in 2 parts, but I'm telling you that first one is gonna be painfully slow, and the second half is gonna be painfully confusing. However, this is a stunning movie. Everything you see is in camera, it's actually happening. There's almost no special effects in this movie, yet it feels like a science fiction movie. There is something happening under the surface, and the movie does such a good job of explaining things, if you're paying attention and reading all the subtitles, that your imagination begins to take over in a way with Stalker that it normally does not do in movies. I mean, it happens in movies, but not to the extent that it can happen with Stalker. At the very least, you could watch this for just some of the absolute best cinematography you're gonna see in a science fiction movie ever. This movie was ahead of its time. Again, not for everybody. Do not just watch this because I'm telling you it's a cool sci-fi movie. If you generally like more interesting art films, Criterion Collection type stuff, Stalker is an amazing one. But we'll get off that, a movie I don't recommend for everybody, and switch to another art film that I recommend for much more of an audience, Bronson. Now, this stars Tom Hardy as one of the most famous prisoners Britain has ever had. Someone who constantly caused riots, broke out, was just an absolute maniac, and Tom Hardy kills it. This is one of the roles he did right before he played Bane. In fact, this is one of the first times Tom Hardy was ever as muscle-bound as he is on camera. He used to actually be really thin, and this was one of the first times he put on a bunch of muscle. He plays a wild man in this movie, and is directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, who would eventually go on to direct Drive. If you've ever seen any of his other movies, you know he does some weird stuff. Though Bronson is kind of in the middle for him in terms of how weird it is. It does go in weird directions, but it's also highly consumable, and you can just have a blast watching Tom Hardy play this character. So while this is somewhat of an art film, it's done so in a way that I think it's going to appeal to a lot of folks watching, especially if you're a fan of Tom Hardy. You have to watch him do this Bronson character. Now we're going to switch things up with a World War II drama starring Daniel Craig called Defiance. Not only is he in this, but also you get a great role from Liev Schreiber, and this is a true story about a bunch of Jews that were hiding out in the woods during World War II and defending themselves. Basically created an encampment, and we're going to wait out the war. So you do get some scenes of action, but it's also just a very good wartime drama. Now obviously there are plenty of great movies that are depicting what happened to the Jews in World War II, but there aren't many depicting what these folks did, where they decided to fight back and try to live off the grid. I don't know if they called it the grid, back in the 1940s, but it is that type of living, and Daniel Craig does a great job. The supporting cast is great. Again, there's some great action. This is just a good, solid movie that I guess because there's so many great movies in the World War II genre, it gets overshadowed, but still solid stuff. It's hanging out on HBO Max. Used to be on Netflix. I would recommend it periodically, but it'll likely be here for a little while as well. All right, and then my number one pick is Spanish language. You're gonna have to read subtitles, and I'm sorry, it's gonna be hard to keep up with because this is another movie about time travel, but it's one of the best ones I've seen this century, Time Crimes. In this movie, you follow a character who begins to notice bizarre things happening around his house, and he falls down a rabbit hole of time shifting in a way very different than I've ever seen it depicted on screen. And that's why I love this movie. Not only is the time travel mechanism different, but the way the story utilizes it and the way the story continues to sort of double up and fall back on itself is absolutely brilliant. I would put this story up there with movies like Memento. It's not quite as good, but it's close in terms of how it's just gonna wrap your brain into a pretzel. If you generally like movies like that, Time Crimes is excellent stuff. You also get kind of a little bit of a slasher movie vibe in the mix as well. It's just this incredible soup that tastes unlike anything else I've ever seen. I absolutely enjoy this movie. It's really wild stuff. Again, you are gonna have to read subtitles. It is well worth it for Time Crimes, but that is the list. Have you seen any lesser known movies lately you wanna let me know about? Who knows, one of your recommendations might make it onto a future video. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring another video. I really did enjoy working with Squarespace before they became a sponsor. I mean, I really do highly recommend them. I also recommend going over to DarrenVanDam.com and signing up for my newsletter. I'm just about to release that first issue, and that is gonna be a regular newsletter that's gonna come to your inbox, packed with additional movie recommendations. There's also gonna be recommendations for shows and music and other stuff too, so make sure to sign up for that before the first one comes out. But I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special HBO Max episode, and you will see me on the next one.